Thank you, Karen Corla. Transport infrastructure is an essential prerequisite for regional development. I'll focus on just a few key points in the time available to me. Firstly, public transport in rural areas is essential for accessibility and social inclusion and can, of course, make a substantial difference in achieving our climate goals. The lack of a robust and reliable public transport system continues to be a challenge and obstacle for people living in rural areas in accessing employment, education and health services. Public transport is an equality issue. It is a vital service that helps those who cannot drive or who cannot afford a private vehicle to get jobs, reach medical appointments and take part in cultural events. People with disabilities in West Cork highlight the inadequacy of local link services, despite recent improvements, and how some services are not wheelchair accessible. People have to rely on family or taxis to get around, or even attend day services and respite and training in some cases. It remains a very, very significant barrier. It is also an age and gender issue, as both young and older people are the demographics who disproportionately use public transport. For the older cohort, there are many who do not have driving licences, especially women aged over 70 who, for historic reasons, never learnt or were not permitted to learn how to drive. They deserve a public transport system that allows them to live a full and healthy life. Furthermore, the absence of proper bus stops and shelters is a massive issue. Towns and villages across West Cork and rural Ireland are screaming out for sheltered bus stops that it would at least allow people to sit and wait out of the rain. I think that really is the bare minimum when we're in Ireland. We know it's going to rain. It's just unbelievable that in most towns and villages around the place there isn't even somewhere to sit in dry weather, and that's just such a disincentive to use public transport. Despite an increase in transport emissions last year, which I think it's important to note was due to COVID restrictions, this sector is a massive contributor to our overall emissions, and public transport can play a clear role in alleviating this. As we face a period of significant change to meet our emissions target, public transport can and it must be central to these plans. We need more public transport, we need more frequent services, guaranteed accessibility and late night routes, and we need it to be subsidised. Funding is key to this. Despite the Minister's assurance of amounts spent, unless it translates into regular, dependable and accessible transportation for as many people as possible, it's not working. Secondly, there will still be a requirement for safe and well-maintained roads. They are a crucial social and economic link. Economic strategies can only be successful if the necessary infrastructure is in place from broadband to roads. Roads are essential for emergency services and for connecting rural communities with hospitals and even GP surgeries, which are increasingly contracting. Public transport very obviously has limitations in rural Ireland compared to built-up areas, so roads are fundamental in filling those gaps. Crucially, better and safer roads also encourage cycling and other active travel. We need rural transport to be joined up to allow all people, young and old, to switch from different forms of mobility quickly and cheaply. I've also raised the issue of road safety recently. There are numerous accident black spots in West Cork, such as the Newcork corner west of Skibbereen and Baxter's Bridge Junction in Bandon, which I'm sure you know, Minister O'Donovan. They're unbelievably dangerous, and I'm just wondering, how many accidents does it take for something to change? And I'm seeking reassurance that once a place is known to be dangerous, that automatic interventions are implemented to save lives. Thirdly, in terms of maritime transport, there's a need to support the ferry services that sustain our island communities. These are vital links that can't be overlooked on discussions around transport, rural and regional transport. The motion calls for clarity on all projects in the National Development Plan 2021 to 2030, including funding and timescales for the progression and the estimated completion of projects. As Deputy Murphy highlighted, and it was a concern of mine around the government's rural development policy, a plan without clear targets, timescales and costs is not a plan, it's just a wish list. The success of rural Ireland lies in properly funded transport systems, and we need better public transport, integrated approaches and safer roads. Ultimately, we need public investment to make this possible. And just in the time I have left, I know you referenced rural Ireland in your speech, Minister, but I think it's often difficult for very many people to understand how far-reaching the impact of the absence of public transport in rural areas is. And just to leave you with one example, in the past, you could always go to your community welfare officer if you needed to kind of present as homeless and look for emergency accommodation. Due to the upsurge in homelessness on account of the housing crisis, you now have to go to the local authority, to the housing office. In West Cork, there is no public transport from very many towns to that housing authority. And the reason it was brought to my attention was in cases of people fleeing domestic violence, you don't necessarily have transport. You might have children with you and lots of stuff, and you can't get to the housing office, which is an absolute disgrace. So just to highlight how specifically in rural areas we really need